Hello and welcome to the inaugural first episode of Old Nerd on the Hill. I am CD. I will be your host. For this Frankenstein's monster of a podcast, I'm not entirely sure what the full classification of this will be until I get the first episode out the door. But the goal is for me to be the proverbial old nerd on the hill, and I'm going to talk about all sorts of nerdy subjects and analyze them as best as I can. Mostly because it's something I do in my pastime, and I find myself annoying people to death with it. And it's like, well, let me see if I can annoy a wider audience. If I at least, not annoy, but you know what I mean. Entertain, ideally, is the goal for this. And, hopefully you'll come away from this either learning something or laughing at my failure. Either way, I'm okay as long as you just have an enjoyable time. That's kind of the goal for this. And hopefully, my deepest hope is that this at least gets you thinking on whatever topic I decide to cover. I'm gonna probably jump around from anything from video games to movies to comic books, the intersection of all of those things, maybe even some other things. My goal is going to be avoiding, for the moment, avoiding politics. I prefer to put stuff like that in a completely different bubble. You will see shades of my opinions, but hey, that's entirely what this thing is. It's an opinion piece as a series. So, also, special thanks to Heather and Bryce for letting me join the Ancient Bee Network and letting me be a part of this grand nerd experiment. And hopefully we can get this off the ground. And hopefully I can be a part of that. If not, well, hopefully I won't be the anchor keeping everything down. Let me put it that way. Uh, I'm rambling, but it's okay. That's what this is supposed to be. It keeps them with the theme of the network. Um, I don't really have any major background in this other than being a massive nerd, mostly self-educated, mostly just a big fan of all these things, and I like to overthink it greatly. The main influence on this podcast is actually, of all things, Dan Carlin's Hardcore History and Common Sense podcast that he does, sort of like the intersection of that, where he will take a topic and just really just thrash it around for a bit. And especially when he takes a story and just he'll explain it and he'll do this wonderful grandiose explanation and then he'll break down the ramifications of it one way or the other. I hope to be able to do that. I'm not entirely sure I'll be able to, but again, the idea is hopefully just entertainment and hope you get some thought out of this. Alright, introduction. I think that's enough of that. To the title of the thing, Marvel vs. DC is going to be the main topic of this, both comics and just in general. I have a weird background with this subject, because growing up, I started out as a Image comic fan. My first superhero as a kid that I really always initially said was my favorite superhero was Spawn, who, in retrospect, not the best character, especially for a kid, but he was such a he's such a good example of that 90s cool factor of, yeah, he's not a good guy, he'll kill someone too, and his powers come from hell, and he's dead, and he has that cape. Look at that cape. Which, admittedly, even now, I'm like, look at that cape. That cape is fucking phenomenal. First F-bomb, alright. And so, though I kind of have realized that my background with Marvel and DC goes deeper than I was aware of initially, because I grew up watching Batman the Animated Series and Superman the Animated Series, and eventually the Justice League, DC animated universe that Bruce Timm headed for years, and frankly is still one of the best interpretations of the DC universe as a whole. Also grew up watching the X-Men cartoon and the Spider-Man cartoon. I gradually distanced myself from those because they became too weird after a while. This because they couldn't get away with much of anything after a bit. So they kept on having to resort to. They couldn't kill Mary Jane, but they could drop her through a portal into numerous universes, and then clones, and it's just. And I don't even want to go into the X-Men franchise. To me, the X-Men franchise is like one of the pinnacles of overcomplicated franchises genre of overcomplication. My personal comic preference nowadays usually tends towards DC because I'm a big proponent of the idea of comics being a modern myth to understand the world that we live in one way or the other. And DC very much pushes that more than Marvel does. Marvel tends to focus on individual stories and character arcs, and to me, both are equally valid in storytelling as far as comic books go. But yeah, I usually tend towards the DC thing, and DC gets complicated, but nothing has ever gotten as complicated as an X-Men comic. The only series from X-Men that ever truly I got was Joss Whedon's run on Astonishing X-Men, I believe it was. And even then, that got really confusing without some background. But within the comic, they gave the background, so it was okay. But yeah, that general preface aside, is from there seems to, beyond like that generalized viewpoint of Marvel focuses on the here and now and the characters more than the overarching mythos, and DC tends to have like these legendary characters and properties that have become mythological in a sense. Beyond that comparison, there's always been this undercurrent of DC versus Marvel, and I'm gonna flat out say it far more falls into the fans than it does the actual comics themselves. Marvel and DC have like a friendly rivalry, but they don't have. The writers and artists shift around between the two so often. Very rarely does any artist or writer tend to stick at one or the other longer than 10 years, and when they do, they eventually become part of the editorial staff or something. So it's to me, it's rarely been the creator, and it's always the fan bases, and this has started to expand further with the DC Expanded Universe, as they call it, and the Marvel Cinematic Universe that have both come into being. DC's is a bit more forced, but at the same time, it was an inevitable reaction to Marvel's stories and the Marvel movies that have evolved out of the blindsiding success of Iron Man and Robert Downey Jr.'s impeccable portrayal of Tony Stark. Though the problem that has kind of evolved for me, and again, DC bias, just putting that out there, I feel there's been this distinct kind of public perception of dumping on anything DC does. Like, they shouldn't even try to catch up to Marvel. They should just, give up right now. Nothing they've done has been really good, so why should they bother? Kind of feeling it's not really based in anything. It's just the general tone you get and just all the shade being thrown at that direction. Where at the same time, Marvel keeps really repeating the same story motifs and story notes again and again and again and again. A good example, Doctor Strange. Love the movie. I really, really, really love the movie. Benedict Cumberbatch is a great character. At the same time, it is Iron Man with magic. Just full stop. It is Iron Man with magic. It is arrogant man, tragic accident, has to expand beyond his horizons, and then has to deal with the repercussions of both his arrogance and the new world he finds himself in. One way or the other. I mean, it's very broad, and there's a lot of different character notes, obviously. But at the same time, there very rarely is a subversion of that formula within Marvel. It follows a very distinct set of beats. The only movies, frankly, that have destroyed those character beats have been Guardians of the Galaxy, which actually is a wonderful subversion of Avengers to me, because Avengers, well, it was a very great marketing thing. I'm not going to say it's not a bad movie. I'm just going to say it did what it had to do, and the Avengers movies kind of exist as this is what continues the overall Marvel franchise to the next step. That's just what they are. But Guardians was such a good subversion of the first Avengers movie. I haven't seen the second one yet. I think it just came out, or is about to come out, so I have no idea how much, if that's going to be a subversion of the second one. I would love to see that be. And the Captain America movies, which Captain America has done such a good job of. All three movies have both captured the character in different eras of the character's comic books better than a lot of other of the Marvel movies. The Iron Man movies don't really capture Iron Man as he's progressed. They all seem to kind of just be the same movie in a way of they all put Tony up, then tear him back down again, and then he emerges at, oh no, he's going to be a better, more responsible person, and then he's not. And that he just keeps getting reset over and over and over and over and over, and it's just boring. Very boring. But Captain America, he progresses as a character from each movie. Not only his movies, but every movie he's been in. From the Avengers movies, he progresses, and his viewpoints have evolved, and he has become a better character as the movies have gone on. None of the other Marvel characters seem to have followed that same kind of motif. The only one who's close to that has been T'Challa, but he's only been in one movie, or Black Panther, for the non-nerd and uninitiated in our terrible, terrible, over-opinionated ways. But yeah, beyond those examples, the Marvel movies are just kind of cookie cutter and keep coming and coming and coming, and it's just, that's all they are. Whereas the DC movies, while they haven't all been perfect, definitely not, they keep trying to bend the formula and experiment. And the one that falls the flattest on its face, Suicide Squad, kind of fell because they tried to do the Marvel formula and it just completely just did not work for them. That movie distinctly needs, to me, a full re-edit to go back to the darker vision that was initially planned for it. And also it needed it to actually have Jared Leto's Joker be a bigger villain in it. There's no reason to have featured him as much as they did in the advertising and not use him. But anyways, aside from that, like I'm in the weird camp. I really like Man of Steel. I think Dawn of Justice theatrical release was confusing and poorly managed, but the home release of the extended version is actually very good and very well done. Snyder does overly use some of his Christ imagery and hammers home, there's a Nostalgia Critic, well-known YouTube personality, there we go, that's the word I was searching for. But Nostalgia Critic, in his Man of Steel review, did this wonderful thing of any time it showed like a Jesus symbology placed with Superman, he just had like this I am Jesus playing in the background on repeat every time it did those moments, and I cannot unsee that every time that happens in the DC movies so far. But it, at the same time, it fits with the character of Superman. Anyways, the main goal I'm trying to get to this is there have only been 3 movies in the DC universe, movie universe so far, while there have been... give me a moment. Iron Man 2, Incredible Hulk. There have been a metric shit ton of Marvel movies. And, so they've obviously had more time to build their concrete evidence. And so I can understand why people are kind of almost impatient for DC to get things right. But I think it all falls on to also this, the expectation seems to be infinitely higher. And I understand that to the extent of the characters in DC are far more recognizable overall. I mean, Thor... A good example, Thor exists kind of as the Superman of the DC universe. But until the movies came out, until that, not a lot of people were kind of aware of that notion. They just were aware of the, and by the way, if you hear squawking and stuff in the background, I apologize. I own parrots. They like to join conversations even when the door is closed. I don't have, sound shielding yet. Especially because I don't know how well this is going to do. But that's beside the point. Apologize for the squawking. But, not a lot of people, and I still think not a lot of people are kind of aware of this idea of Thor being like the Superman-esque character that Jack Kirby set him up to be in the Marvel Universe. Whereas everyone knows Superman, Batman, and to an extent Wonder Woman. So I get the frustration with those movies not really representing the characters in a way that most people are familiar with. Superman, the Man of Steel and Dawn of Justice, I think, have done a great job of showing the modern Superman character as like this really good person who's trying to understand his place in a very confusing world. Is it always handled perfectly? No, but it does handle it extremely better than I think people give it credit for. Ben Affleck's Batman, at least in Dawn of Justice, is really, really... He's often held up as like the shining thing, mostly because, to me, he's way more interesting than the Chris Nolan Batman, and Christian Bale's Batman that from a few years ago, because those movies were only interesting because of the villains. Uh, Obviously, Heath Ledger's Joker, Tom Hardy's wonderful Professor Bane, as I like to call him, because he talks like a renegade college professor more than anything else. Liam Neeson's Ra's al Ghul. It is Raish, not Raz, because it's Arabic. But anyways, but yeah, the villains of those movies were far more interesting than metal vocalist Batman. Whereas the Batman of Dawn of Justice and the expanded DC universe has become far more interesting of a character, mostly because they're putting him in the place in the same way, kind of how Captain America in the Marvel movies has been having an evolving view. It definitely looks like Batman of the DC movies will be in that place of evolving as a character, especially since he really comes, if you think about it, from a thematic low point, to the point of where, Batman's been worn down by 20 years of Gotham. And so he's digging to the point of where the movies, the basic descriptions so far have been saying, inspired by Superman's sacrifice, spoiler warning. But, anyone who saw Doomsday in the trailers and didn't think they were going to kill Superman is kind of an idiot. I just want to say that. I know it's an uncomfortable thing to say, but that's just a personal opinion. But anyways, since they're already kind of paving the way that Batman's going to be building himself back up to the Batman I think people are far more familiar with, of the incredible, I'm not going to kill anyone, I'll beat the living crap out of you, but I'm not going to kill you. I'd like to see them get to the point that the Arkham video games did with Batman. They kind of hit their stride in their portrayal of the character. I still say my favorite moment that sums up how Batman should be is in Arkham Knight, which is overall a mediocre game, but it had great moments, and one of them was early on, he's interrogating a guy, and he's holding the guy's wrist, and after the guy gives him information, and Batman just goes, "If you're lying, I'll break the other one," and the guy goes, "Other what?" And he just twists and horribly breaks the dude's wrist. Drops the guy on the ground and just leaves him screaming in the street as he goes to investigate the clue. That is, while at the same time afterwards leaves like a note for the police to catch him. That kind of stuff. Well, I already said the F-bomb. I'll try and keep them to a minimum. But that kind of thing, to me, is Batman. He didn't kill the guy, but he definitely left him worse for wear, and hopefully to reconsider whatever choices led him to that point. Overall comparison. There we go. Okay, I'm back. But yeah, but it seems like the DC movies are trying to build their foundation, but it seems like people are seeing the foundation and they're not even looking at the big picture. They're not even taking time to go, well, I wonder how this is going to go. They're just immediately going, oh, that sucks. Man, that looks like shit. Wow. Looks like they're not doing a good thing over there. That's going to completely collapse in on them. You should restart all over. Not just completely. Because they're expecting the same level of structure of the Marvel movies that the Marvel movies have had almost 10 years now to work on. Was it Iron Man came out in, I'm going to say 2007. Maybe 2008. It doesn't, I don't remember. And I'm not going to look it up because that would lead to typing, and that's more noise that I don't want to deal with. But anyways, those movies have had 10 years to build a foundation, and this movie universe that is now barely in its fourth year, Yeah, they're going to have an uphill battle, but I think people need to cut it some slack. Also, at the same time, I think they need to kind of kneecap Marvel a bit and let them know, hey, stop doing the same thing over again. Or they know because what Marvel has done has worked really well for them, and it continues to work really well for them. Like I said myself, I like Doctor Strange. I acknowledge it's a very formulaic movie and continues that formula that I detest in the Marvel movies, but they do it well. So I don't know if Marvel's gonna ever really suffer from the epic burnout that will hit it eventually. I don't. Maybe they'll learn and keep evolving. History shows they probably won't. DC is already starting to radically shift its thing. I mean, the biggest thing that they have done in their favor is Jeff Johns is now in charge of them, or at least has a major say in the cinematic universe, which is definitely needed because Jeff Johns, for anyone who doesn't know, has been working in the DC comics since late 90s, I want to say. Maybe a bit earlier. But he was actually responsible for managing at least three different reboots of the DC universe that one could argue whether or not all of them were good in one way or the other. They all had benefits and they all had, like any reboot in any franchise. But, him being there is a good sign, and it's already kind of showing because Wonder Woman is looking wonderful, and Justice League hopefully will be good. I'm. It's that weird holding my breath kind of thing for Justice League because personally, I don't need it to be good, but I really want it to be good. I had that same feeling about Dawn of Justice. I don't need to be. Well, no, Dawn of Justice I needed to be good because I needed to see a good first interaction between Batman and Superman on live action film. Did they do it right? Yeah, they could have done better. But I enjoyed it. Hell, I even enjoyed Jesse Eisenberg's Luthor, and that is a very controversial fan statement. But my main reason for sticking by it is I like the idea of. Because it happens every now in the comics, if Luthor gets way too much knowledge that someone as hyper calculative as he is, it's kind of that idea of he gets over saturated in the information he's absorbing, and it just drives him over the edge. And I'd like to see the Luthor by the, at least, maybe not the end of Justice League, but eventually emerge as the calm, collected, terrifying CEO Luthor that people are familiar with from the comics. I would love to see that variation of Luthor emerge. Will Eisenberg be able to pull that off? I think he has the capability of it, but we'll just have to wait and see. That being said, honestly, this all kind of boils down to the fan bases. I think Marvel's fan base needs to definitely open up a bit more to the DC movies, one way or the other. Just as, and also it's just that thing of there should at least not be as much shade put towards it. DC fans, as far as self-criticization goes, don't need to react so obsessively negatively to the critical response. As someone who has done so, I will admit at points it's an overreaction, but at the same time, this all boils down to the big thing with fans and fan bases and fan culture is it eventually locks into a form of tribalism, which is a very standard part of human social psychology, to the best of my understanding. And Like, I've known a few nerds here and there who have been like, I don't understand sports teams at all. I don't get how people get so worked up about it. And then I'll ask them, about their favorite video game series, or like if they have a favorite series, or if there's a reason they dislike one thing, and then they get immensely worked up and like, Sony is terrible because they do X, or Microsoft is X horrible because they do Y, or Nintendo needs to grow up, or some other childish weird thing. And then at least one conversation I've had with someone is like, I just kind of stopped them. It's like, and that is sports. Because that's what it is. It happens in politics, but politics it's a bit more volatile because it revolves far more about a person's core beliefs than I'd like to think pop culture things do. But at the same time, nerds and geeks and whatever you want to consider yourself, pop culture stuff is integral to us because it's our way of interpreting and accepting the world. It's sometimes like a good example of is gonna dive a bit personal, but I was in a group therapy kind of thing a while ago, and we were trying to find examples of how to explain emotions, and immediately the first thing I could think of was the emotional spectrum from the Green Lantern series. In the comics, the Green Lantern ring that everyone knows actually is just one in a whole series of chords, and green is the representative of courage and will. And while there's a yellow that represents fear, and there's orange that's greed, and red that's hatred, just that core idea. And I actually use that as a way to understand emotions overall, and the fact that I can do that with a comic book is wonderful. So I understand why people get worked up over it. I think my overarching view on this is there shouldn't be a. I think people need to really just take a step back and not have the Marvel versus DC mentality. Have, you know, is it a story I can relate to in any way? And like a good example is Heather, and I think she said it a few times in Hey Brace. I try so hard not to immediately mimic, but she has trouble relating to the character of Batman, and I understand that completely. Not every character is going to be for everyone, and I think it's like music genres and stuff. You just need to. I'm trying to get to it. It's just hard to kind of just yank out of me, but no, the overall thing I'm trying to get to. Okay, I got it. The overall thing I'm trying to get to is acknowledge when something is not for you, but that other people will like it, and don't admonish them for liking it. You know, accept that, hey, this isn't for me. The only time you should really rile up and like get your pitchfork and torch out is if we get, I don't know, Judge Dredd Superman. Superman who floats around and eradicates people for no good reason because they broke the law. I can't make without dental work, I can't make half of my face go down like a Stallone's, and that is a terrible thing that I'm probably going to hell for making that joke and reference. That being said, but yeah, it just kind of boils down to unless it's something like Suicide Squad is a very weak movie and frankly needs a ground up rework one way or the other. So, calling DC out on that kind of stuff is good, but calling them out for trying something interesting with Dawn of Justice and Man of Steel, in comparison to not calling Marvel out for repetitive character arc formulas in almost all of their movies. Even the Captain America movies, which I love, have moments of repetition between at least the second and third movie. But, acknowledge your hypocrisy one way or the other, and acknowledge when something you like does something terrible, and trying to enjoy things that you feel like you shouldn't because it goes against what your tribe likes. Somewhere in this rambling self-conversation, I think that was the overall point. But, if you can discern anything from it all, leave a comment, let me know. Hopefully I'll try and take it in and work with it. Just feedback will be good. Constructive criticism. Useless hate will be ignored, because that is what you should do. And I think that's where I'm going to cut this off for today. After 30 minutes plus of rambling, almost 40. So, in lieu of a better sign-off, be good to